Hello, and welcome back to the Argyle HR Leadership Forum, Workplace Compliance Tools, Processes, and Technology. My name is Vicki Lynn Brunska with Argyle. It's great to have everyone joining us today. Just a couple of notes before I turn things over to our esteemed speaker. First, a quick reminder to stop by our sponsors' virtual booths at any time during today's event and for the following week. Our partners are committed to providing you with valuable content and a great overall experience. At any time during the event or in the replay, you can visit those virtual booths from the main agenda page. And now, without further delay, I'd like to introduce our speaker, Jeffrey Dubisky, Global TA Lead, CW Workforce Strategy at Intuitive Surgical. We are so excited to have Jeff with us for a keynote presentation titled Extended Workforce Management, Compliance, Pay, Benefits. Welcome, Jeffrey, and over to you.
Thanks so much. Really appreciate the invitation to be here, and good morning to everyone online. So I've had the pleasure over the past 30 years to work inside of workforce planning, talent acquisition, and more specifically inside the contingent workforce. And it's been an interesting ride for those 30 years. We've come into such an interesting time within the past 10 years, never mind 5, when it comes to the definition of our contingent workforce, or as now we've been talking about extended workforce, and how do we actually compile the data, leverage technology to drive business decisions, and more importantly, so much compliance that's coming around this particular piece of our workforce. So for today, we thought we'd spend our time initially talking about the 5 sort of critical areas that were listed for us to discuss. And then I'm going to take you on a little bit of a journey that we've undergone to allow us to drive through data enabled by technology, very specific ways to understand our workforce, to comply with areas of pay and benefits that are impacting the extension of that, and a myriad of other things that obviously within the HR community allow us to help drive the business forward. So first and foremost, a lot of times the contingent workforce still remains a hot potato inside the organization. Is it something that the indirect procurement team should be handling? Is it the HR team to handle it? Is it not handled at all and kind of the Wild West? Fundamentally, what tends to work incredibly well is, number one, starting with a procurement-led organization, then moving it completely into HR, because it is people, it is liability, and it is your workforce. And so we're going to talk a lot about a cross-functional stakeholder engagement, which will fundamentally change the nature of how we source this type of talent. And also, as you'll see in this journey, how do we get people's fingerprints on this so that fundamentally we're driving a consensus about how we engage and manage and utilize external labor. Secondarily, data everywhere. And as we know now, as global arena of GDPR, different areas of data privacy within the US and globally, we have some potholes to navigate, specifically around how do we harmonize, aggregate, and then democratize that data while being very careful and compliant. Also, the criticality of a flexible workforce. Obviously, temps in the days of old were bookends. It was localized seasonal surge and sort of just-in-time labor. And on the other end, we used to have individuals that were the early giggers, the folks that were traveling. To date myself a little bit, one of the big replatformings that was going on in technology in the early 90s were people that had AutoCAD expertise to move design drafting off the boards and onto the computer screen, and on-premise installation of software. Obviously, we've come a long way since then, but it still remains true, that search of talent that will allow us to get long-term and even short-term projects up and running. And I think, quite honestly, as we look at an elastic model of workforce, we fundamentally want to ensure that we can ramp up for things and then ramp them down without a riff, right, within our actual employed workforce. As we come down to the last 2, technology, is it an enabler or a hindrance? A lot of times, many of the pieces of technology that we put in are trying to do 3 fundamental things: forced workflow, compliance toll gates, and data. But it takes a lot of the user experience, especially between talent, out of the overall environment. And so we really want to take a look at how do we enable certain aspects at speed and scale, while also keeping some of the actual person-to-person relationships involved. The perennial fight around what is a source of truth versus a source of record, and how do we interact with those. And then lastly, compliance. A changing legislative agenda, not only in the US, but globally, keeps us on our toes. The days of old, and this presentation does not allude to nor take into consideration the Microsoft case of old. Things have progressed so far past that, and yet I do find some companies struggling with that benchmark case. And then also taking a look at how do we comply early on in the shifts by, again, having technology and data available to us. So I'm going to take you a little bit on the walk of our journey. One of the things that I've run into in all of these years that I've been doing this, in well over 100 programs where I was either a service provider, a consultant, or now a practitioner, is how many contingent workers do you have? And it really comes down to the definition of what you have in scope in regards to a contingent worker. But what we've begun to do is widen that lens to say all non-employees that either have a badge for physical access, excuse me, or digital credentials to get inside our ecosystem. And the benchmark for that is, once you think you know everybody you have and you open that definition, you will wind up with between 3 to 5 times of that actual number. Pardon me. And once we open that definition, then the hard work begins to understand who are they, what are they doing, where are they doing it, why are they doing it, how long have they been here, how long will they be here, and how much is this really costing us? And so the thought here is, can we get our arms around the workforce in totality that allows us to bring our goods and services to market? So why does this really matter? Well, again, as I alluded to, once a program is stood up to manage your contingent or extended workforce, it really is human capital. It's liability, it's planning, it's capacity, it's cost. And so we started by designing a global taxonomy that codified 5 very specific engagement types. We gave it a name, we gave the AKAs because it is different globally. We gave it a definition, what the engagements look like, and we actually gave examples of that. That took a little bit of time to make sure that we could socialize all individuals to say, you can call it whatever you'd like to, but it's going to wind up in this box. Secondarily, how are we onboarding and offboarding individuals? How are we deploying assets? Are we doing background checks, drug tests? What are the compliance criteria that we're doing? And are we ensuring that they're done before they arrive? And more specifically, are we reclaiming what we need afterwards? So building out a matrix that aligns to the overall categories. And then lastly, what are we doing around regulatory and legal compliance, as well as our internal stakeholders? So when we take a look at personas or different regulatory bodies, what are the key issues that they have? What are the concerns and impacts, and how do we address those? So fundamentally, we wound up taking a look at, with the data that we were able to pull together as a hypothesis, we could provide all of our functions globally with real to near time reporting of, again, who, what, where, when, how long, how much. We were able to begin to provide our physical security force with the assurance that people were cleared to actually receive a badge and reclaim that badge once they were offboarded. A curveball we were thrown was our global trade compliance group, ensuring that we were looking at individuals that might be through sanctioned countries, specifically because of IP protection that we had to guard against. Our space planning, people love this. We've been in a growth mode even as a 27-year-old company, and space is at a premium. So now knowing how many people are inbound, do they need space? How long will they need space? Has become a very specific piece. Workforce planning, asset deployment, budgeting, all of those things now with good data are allowing us to make good business decisions. Of course, in the US and globally, we've got evolving pay transparency and equity things to ensure we comply against. For those of you that are operating in California, you're coming up on your 3rd annual submission of California pay transparency data, which has to include contingent workers and consultants. Also, New Jersey, in line with looking at equity and benefits administration. For those of you in construction and trades, Massachusetts prevailing wage, which has been around for a long time. How do you ensure that you're in compliance? And these were areas that we tackled specifically with that, as well as guaranteed time off and protected time, again, here in California and others. I will simply say that if you operate and can operate and be compliant in California, you can pretty much do it anywhere in the United States and be well underway for obviously working worldwide. But the goal was to create a common data set across all sources of records into one single source of truth. And the neat thing here is we defined ourselves as not looking for a land grab of what we control, but enabling individuals and functions to do what they needed to do by taking work off of their plates and specifically gaining access to what they needed to make decisions. My apologies. So what do you need to do to get to where we're at today? So early collaboration is key. One of the things that we needed to start with was taking a look at where was all the data that housed specifically where all these extended workers were. And we took a look globally and had a myriad of systems that housed fragments of data, but no specific full sort of dossier on an individual, with the exception of our SAP Fieldglass VMS system, which is geared 100% for resource tracking and contingent workforce management. But we only had a portion. Again, we were in that 3 to 5x once we defined non-employees. So we worked with our data privacy leader and developed a charter that kept us compliant globally as we harvested data and did a conjoined analysis of those fragments to come up with what we believe to be our fully extended workforce. My apologies. What wound up happening after we got our charter underway was to ensure that we actually gained a full buy-in as to our goal of one single source of truth and one entry and exit point was to include every business function globally. Our team was just over 44 people. It included every function possible, and it allowed us to take a look at what data did they have, what data did they need, what was the reason behind it, and align that to the actual data privacy charter, and begin to understand not only what sort of compliance toll gates were required to gain access, but also what did we need to manage? What did finance need to know around run rates of cost? Again, what did facilities and planning need to understand in regards to space planning? And one of the things that has come out as a tremendous build here too is, for those of you on your diversity efforts, we consume a lot of our contractors. We convert them to employees. We were doing census anonymized data to understand the diversity composition of our extended workforce, and it helped to align with our overall goals of representing the communities where we work, live, and play. So the biggest influence here, as we went to sort of these data and systems owners, was what was in it for them. Again, we were trying to reduce their work, trying to harmonize the work, and make the data far more usable, not only to them, but the consumers of their particular areas. So one of the interesting things that, again, we wanted to tackle was the data. And as I mentioned to you, we set up a data charter. We knew all the systems that we had to scrape data from. And so we set up fundamentally a clean room where our data team pulled all of these fragments of data together, did a conjoined analysis, did some duplication check, and came up with some hypothesis of the overall totality of our extended workforce that had badge or digital access. Now, what was interesting there, however, is the amount of time it took to aggregate, to analyze, and to deliver to us. Within roughly 2 weeks or so, it was obviously dated and it wasn't correct. So we needed to remedy that, and we also needed to figure out a way to reduce the amount of time on our data team. So then we took a look at how do we make that much better. Now, I hope this doesn't fall flat with everybody. I know there's such a big buzz about generative AI and all the AI tools that are out there. But we used a very basic piece of intelligent automation, which is RPA. And I think RPA is overlooked dramatically in how we can get immediate lift, tremendous ROI We happen to be an automation anywhere shop. We worked with our RPA team to basically take and translate everything that our data warehouse team was doing and built a digital global monitoring bot. It's our digital assistant. The bot has saved us over 6 weeks of data analytics labor. And again, what used to take a couple of weeks to deliver a quarterly rear view, now we actually get once a week a report that shows me our total active population of people with badge or digital access, those that have had their full screening complete, those that are pending, those that have failed. And the big number that we are watching, right, because that has started to come down, is non-compliance. And the non-compliance obviously shows you that where the leak in the boat is, because if we're truly ensuring one entry and one exit point, non-compliance, quite honestly, should go to zero in theory, and obviously where we'd like to be able to drive to. So what does really all of that mean for everyone here? And I hope there's some practical examples here, obviously, of how you could literally leave this particular presentation and start on a journey to go forward. Well, there's a couple of key takeaways here, and I'd like to obviously also give you an idea of timeline. So we started from scratch. We had no playbook. We had no one that presented to us about how this was done. So this literally took us almost 18 months to stand up. At roughly the 12-month mark, we ran this over our current VMS system, which again is our source of truth now, and found that we were almost 100% compliant with our new program and profile. But again, it's the best data that we had, but only represented about 1/3 of the total population. And it still took an additional 6 months to understand how we would roll this out globally. The framework I've just given to you should drive you to an ability to stand up a straw model and begin to test and pilot within 6 months. So a lot of lessons learned tried to condense right here into this particular presentation. So what were some of the key lessons learned that we had with this? Well, number one, beta testing of the bot really highlighted blind spots. The blind spots, whether it was duplicative data that required a lot of cleanup, fragments of data, areas of non-compliance, quite honestly, and taking a look at how we would do retroactive screening, badges that were still active, yet people were no longer on site, and so we could decommission those. And fortunately, we did not have any loose assets like laptops and others. But again, finding just a handful of badges that allowed physical access when those people were no longer with us obviously was one key attribute of our ability to place a flag and show a win. Next, unintended consequence was looking at some of the impacted areas of individuals that the new testing might actually create a problem for. We do not have an exception process around how we do our overall screening and onboarding. What we have done is created exempted classifications. And it might sound nuanced, but it is very specific. If you allow, obviously, a way for someone to ask for an exception, that often becomes not necessarily the rule, but is used far more often than necessary. So what we've done through the testing and through, again, unintended consequence of impact, we have created exempted classes. And I will tell you just a funny aside. When we've put our overall screening process in place, we were working with security to close down badges that had been idle for whatever period of time. And wouldn't you know, the very first person that was at the front door and couldn't get in was someone that was working with our CEO. So we could have gone a little bit deeper in regards to who had those badges rather than looking at idle time. Again, some of the exemptions that we found was, number one, we have a lot of construction going on at our overall facilities. We also have a lot of maintenance going on. Within trades, there are people that, and again, this isn't a white collar, blue collar issue. We do find a higher instance of flags that come through for background checks. Obviously, we cannot business interrupt what we have going on with construction and maintenance. We exempted that particular class and just put different rules around badge access and escorts. So again, very simple way to not interrupt that. We also have OEM providers. When we have a problem with our SAP platform, when we have a problem with whatever, we have to be able to have a help desk from the OEM provider call in directly to our warehousing systems or our ERP systems and fix them. We don't have time to ensure that they have a background check and trade compliance. So again, we've specifically dealt with that on the contract side rather than the individual side. Bots fail. They fail because we might make a change to a data file and we don't teach it what the change is. Or it might have, in the case of what we found, holidays. Some of our providers were not dropping the data files out on Mondays because it was a holiday. So you have to monitor the bot, you have to understand why it's failing, and obviously help it move forward. Leaks happen, as I mentioned, looking at that non-compliance at the very bottom. It's a great way to look at root cause and close off fundamentally. How did someone get a badge or digital credentials without going through that main gate? And then lastly, weekly monitoring has really allowed us to take a look at gaps in our communication around policy, taking a look at timing to meet compliance, and actually adjusting for localization of SOPs. Obviously, what we've done is deployed this specifically within the US, but we need to localize for other countries, which means, again, engaging data privacy, legal, our indirect procurement team, and others to ensure that we are able to create not only in keeping that harmonization, but the localization required to keep us compliant. I always like to say that unless someone's going to go to jail or the hospital, we're not going to change it, but we can make sure that the business isn't interrupted. So I'm coming up on time. I know that we've got some questions coming in, and let me go ahead and tackle those. Why is effective management of extended workforce more critical now than ever before? I think that's a great question. Number one is the proliferation of how many people we have. Now, again, if you think about expanding your definition to non-employees and not just contingent or temp, you will find that you have a significant portion of your workforce bringing goods and services to market inside of your ecosystem. Laws are weighing heavily on the using company, not necessarily the supply company, the individual themselves, or the independent contractors, which of course we all know are fundamentally constantly in the paper. And Uber, Lyft, and DoorDash are a completely different discussion rather than what we've been talking about. I also think that as we begin to become far more elastic in how we respond to our new market entries, access to available talent, and managing and planning out our workforce in smaller increments of 12 to 36 months, again, the criticality here is really tremendous. And I would also say that from when I started in this industry 30 years ago to today, it is far more litigious than it ever has been. And so getting your arms around this, having an immediate response with your legal, your HR, your compliance teams, and even in our case, employee relations, is paramount to ensuring that we not only are doing the right things for all of our workforce, but also protecting the organization. Next, how can HR, procurement, and IT teams collaborate to streamline extended workforce management? Great question. One of the things that we've had to take a good hard look at is the myriad of compliance items that are required from each individual function. I think streamline is sort of the operative word there. The technology obviously can help in the overall leaning of that process. But the biggest thing that we found is getting an audience with each of those functions as well as the others and explaining specifically what the type of service arrangement, contract arrangement, and management arrangement is for contingent temporary services and consultants. because everyone had a different definition and a different perspective. And what that was doing was actually increasing our fundamental ability to keep pace with the organization. So the discussions and the alignment on what is the actual thing that we're talking about and how do we minimize speed to placement, speed to data, while keeping ourselves compliant was paramount. So lots of meetings, but really good meetings to talk about each other's needs and fundamentally asking bringing the consultant out and me why. Ask why 5 times. If you get to a point where someone's exhausted or the 4th or 5th answer is the same, you've gotten to the root cause. How can automation help ensure compliance with new legislation and reporting requirements? So depending on the type of automation you're using, in this case, again, we're using both RPA and our VMS. We rely on intake from our internal counsel, our external counsel. We rely on industry groups. We rely on our suppliers, which are great partners. And of course, we do use an MSP and our MSP partner. We get a heads up on changing legislation. We try to define very early on, what does that mean to change not only within the VMS system, but how would we have to retrain the bot and be ready for a launch point. So pre-planning, make sure that you're at least on a quarterly call for what's on the horizon and prepare for that, because these changes are not as simple as I would like to think they are. Not a lot of user serviceable parts in there. It does take our partners to help us reconfigure, to test, and then deploy. How can organizations overcome challenges in integrating workforce data to multiple systems? So another great question. The goal here is to understand what is the absolute bare necessity of data in your boundary systems and what is the source of truth. Once you get there, then we can talk about, is that something as simple as an FTP drop of a file that gets ingested, or is an API necessary? And if it's necessary, at what speed and frequency does that have to go? Because fundamentally, one of the things that we found, again, in our gap, especially our SLAs with our IT risk department to offboard individuals, was our sweeps for offboarding were only done twice a day on a Pacific time and schedule. And we were missing SLAs largely because of that processing. So it's a great opportunity to, again, meet with each of the individual system owners, discuss what needs to happen, how it needs to happen, and then align on what those production cycles look like. So I think I'm at time. I thank you so much for the questions. I hope, again, that you found something very reasonable here to just go back, begin to ask some questions, or start a new initiative, and wish you well in doing that.
Thank you, Jeffrey, for such an incredible keynote presentation. Thanks for setting us off on that good note. Also want to thank everyone else for joining us today for this session. This session, along with all of today's content, will be available on demand following the event. And as a reminder, please do check out the prizes and raffle rules section to see how you can earn points to win a prize. And our next session will begin at 11:35 a.m. Eastern Time, and that will be a panel discussion titled Navigating Compliance in AI-Driven HR Operations. Thank you again, Jeffrey, and we look forward to seeing you there.